Yeah, we in a previous session we already talked about the pain and PNS, but this session will be about more generally about the body. We have some exciting presenters at our session. We have Murthy Simham Hatla, President and CEO of SetPoint Medical. We have Jim Surek from Valencia Technologies, CEO, and Uli Gomel, CTO of NeoBionica. And before we jump into the panel, I just want to give them a chance to present their companies. So let's start with Murthy. You can...
It's your choice.
Thank you. Well, good morning. Can you hear me back there? All right. So I'm at SetPoint Medical. I've been with the company a little over 7 years, going on 8 now. And we're in the autoimmune space. So we've developed a nerve stimulator to treat patients with autoimmune disease. And most of you are familiar with autoimmune disease. It's a condition where your immune system attacks the tissue in your own body. And it can be very debilitating. The conditions that we are targeting are rheumatoid arthritis, inflammatory bowel disease, multiple sclerosis, psoriatic arthritis. Our lead indication is in rheumatoid arthritis. We just got PMA approval in July of this year, and we are in the process of commercializing a therapy. Now, before I talk about SetPoint, I just want to set the stage for the state of affairs in the management of patients with autoimmune disease. The most common method of treating patients with autoimmune disease is drugs that suppress inflammation by immunosuppressing the patient. So that's kind of the general approach. These are generally biological drugs. They're very expensive. They list for $60,000 to $90,000 a year per patient. And in the US, we spend about $100 billion a year on autoimmune drugs, of which about $30 million is spent on rheumatoid arthritis. So these are very expensive drugs that put a lot of pressure on the Medicare Trust Fund. From a patient perspective, these drugs have been revolutionary because with autoimmune disease, it's not just about relieving signs and symptoms. Take the example of rheumatoid arthritis. Reduction of pain is necessary, but it isn't sufficient. You have to downregulate pro-inflammatory cytokines because the chronic inflammation leads to other issues, such as higher incidence of cardiovascular disease, melanomas, and so on. So you have to address the root cause of inflammation. Furthermore, you need to demonstrate objectively that you're having some positive effect at the tissue level in terms of damage to your joints in the case of RA, reduction of damage to the nerves in the case of MS, and the lining of your gut in the case of IBD. So the bar is very high. It's signs and symptoms plus cytokines plus evidence of reduction of structural damage. Now, the other issue for a lot of these patients is in the context of RA, these drugs are all self-administered for the most part. About 80% of the patients administer the drugs on their own, primarily through injections. These drugs come with black box warnings because of the risk of serious infections, melanomas, and major adverse cardiac events. So these are not benign drugs. So there's a price to pay for protecting your joints. The onset age for RA is about 30 to 50 years. So it's not a disease of the elderly, and it's 80% female. It has to do with the 2 X chromosomes. And the disease is extremely debilitating if not controlled properly. The pain is so extreme, you can't button your own blouse, you can't flick the light switch on and off, you can't twist the knob to enter your own home. So if you had a therapy that could reduce disease activity like these drugs, improve the patient experience, because these drugs are massively invasive to the patient's quality of life, and save the healthcare system a lot of money, that would be a breakthrough, and that's kind of what our focus is. Now, we just got approval for RA, and we'll start a trial in MS in the next few months. For RA, we got a pretty broad indication. The indication is for patients who are not well managed after having been exposed to 1 or more biological drugs. And that's what gives us an unusually large $20 billion plus TAM tied to this indication statement. And at a very high level, what we observed is that 75% of patients had a good to moderate response at the 1-year mark. There's a 60% reduction in tender and swollen joint counts. Half the patients were in low disease activity or remission at 1 year. And with MRI, there was evidence of reduction in the progression of joint erosion by 50% in the treatment versus the sham group. So we checked all of those boxes, and most importantly, at a 1-year mark, 75% of patients were off their immunosuppressive drugs, which has huge implications for cost avoidance and health economics. So that's kind of where we're at. That's the label. That's the indication statement. Those are the health economic advantages. And we just started launching commercially. And this is a device. It's tiny. We only stimulate for 1 minute a day. And this device is implanted on the left cervical vagus nerve. And the patient is sent home with this wireless charger that they wear around the neck with a simple magnetic clasp for 5 minutes a day. Now, it is very important for us to design a device that doesn't look like a science project. Patients will be quite tolerant of a very invasive device if it's the last option. They're not going to be tolerant of a very invasive device early in the patient journey. So we just want to lower barriers to adoption. And when patients see this and they see the charger, they tend to calm down. And in our studies, in the clinical study that we just concluded, 40% of the patients who enrolled had failed only one biological drug, despite the availability of 12 different drugs. And 24,000 patients took the eligibility survey to participate in a 242 patient study. So this is going to be driven by patients. Patients want other options. They want a way to treat themselves without immunosuppression. So I'm going to stop there. There's a lot to talk about reimbursement and so on, but I'm sure we'll cover that through Q&A.
Thank you.
Jim, go ahead. Yeah.
All right. Jim Surik, CEO of Valencia Technologies. So before I go into what we do, I've been in neuromodulation. I created the commercial team for Advanced Bionics, ended up selling it to Boston Scientific, was at the Cochlear business, sold that to Sonova. And the reason I bring that up because of the background that I have in neuromodulation. So when I came to Valencia Technologies just about a year ago, we flipped everything upside down on its head and how we're approaching this market. And what I mean by that is that people thought of us as a competitor to InterStim and now Axonics, which really what we're doing is we're going after this blue ocean of patients, because you mentioned the TAM. Our TAM is anywhere, it's about 50 to 60 billion. And now there's a new thing that is out there that's called the theoretical total accessible market, which is about 200 billion. So I throw that out there just to show you how big that is, and that's just in the continental United States. So what we've done is our approach is we're not going after that sacral nerve modulation marketplace. So we are in overactive bladder, urinary urge incontinence, because what we're really doing is we're going after this blue ocean of patients that exist everywhere outside this OAB care pathway. The OAB care pathway was created 30 years ago to direct patients to these OAB specialists. Only about 52,000 patients are actually implanted a year in that marketplace. Why? This is where we flip the market upside down. The reason is because it's very invasive, it's very complex. We talk about neuromodulation and we talk about the complexity. We talk about programmers. We talk about rechargeability in some of these products. That actually makes physician life more complicated, the practice life more complicated, the patient's life more complicated. Most urologists, 90%, will not implant a sacral nerve stimulation device because of the complexities of it. So when this marketplace that we talk about is, today, it's at about a $2 billion accessible market. Why is that? Because all these patients exist outside the OAB practice. So we are attacking and going after men's health doctors that have not been really presented with this technology, BPH, cancer, endourology. because those patients are there. Those patients actually exist in the gynecological offices as well that never get to a urologist. If you talk to a UAB doctor today, they will tell you that their wait list to see a patient is 4 to 6 months. If you talk about their surgical schedule, it's about 4 to 5 months out. So a lot of these patients don't have access and or give up. So what we've created is a nickel size stimulator for the tibia that anyone can do. You don't need to be a specialist. So when we are truly looking at this from an unconventional perspective, we are looking at the blue ocean, where these patients exist, what do these patients want? So I have a commercial background. I have 5 M&As under my belt, building commercial teams because of that perspective that we take. How can we look at this from a patient's perspective that correlates to the physician practice in the healthcare market? To do that, you need clinical advantage. If you don't have clinical advantage or value, you're dead. You need economic and fiscal. That doesn't just mean are the doctors making money in the facilities, but how are the patients and their families benefiting economically? And then from a strategic perspective, we look at it, doctor, if you were to offer this in your marketplace, what would that do to you strategically to bring more patients in, to take relief within your practice, to get that wait list down from 4 months to 2 months? And so when we talk about neuromodulation, I don't, the previous panel, it was technology, technology, technology. There are no comparative studies in sacral nerve stimulation. There are no comparative studies in spinal cord stimulation, nor in PNS. They're equivalent. So we take the perspective, we're equivalent, except what we're doing is we're implanting a patient. 91% of our patients get 2 programmings or less, and we won't see you for 3+ years. Battery dies, we put a new one in. Our 2nd generation device will be 8+ years. But that's how we're looking at the market, right? I'm not looking at it that my waveform, my pulse width, my programmer, my this is the best. We look at it and say, how do we untether these patients from your practice? How do we untether you from the patients so that you can see more, treat the healthcare that we truly need to treat, these patients, their families, the practice, the caregivers, and set the patients free? And so, as you can see, I'm more of that commercial perspective to be able to bring this to more patients across the country, hopefully worldwide soon. And it's not, completely not focused on our technology is better than your technology. It's a simple, like I said, nickel-sized stimulator that any urologist can do. So that's it.
Thank you. Yeah, Uli, go ahead, please. We have slides.
All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Uli Gommel. I am the CTO of Neobionica. And before I go into my slides, when I prepared this panel, I realized it's actually the 3rd time that I'm on this panel, and I'm humbled, to be here with all this great talent, the experience, and I really appreciate, the organizers bringing us all together every year here. So thanks for that. Also, as you noticed, I got a T in my title, so I'm really a technology officer. My 2 colleagues over there are more on the commercial side of things, so it's really exciting to, bring all these worlds together. Next slide, please. So my background, really quick. I started my career about 20 years ago in the hearing aid space in medical device class 2 with a big player called Siemens. So big corporation, global, learned a lot there. Learned a lot about process and product development and so on and so forth. And then I moved to Singapore for Siemens for a quick stint of 2 years. And after that, I moved to California to join Advanced Bionics, where I had my first exposure to medical device class 3, in particular a cochlear implant stimulator. So at Advanced Bionics, responsible for R&D, mechanical hardware development, brought a few products to market. One of them is displayed here. This is an exciting one. It's a 3D, compatible magnet system, which was something we developed at the time, and we got a little award for it. But the takeaway here is really my background is product development, manufacturing, transferring to manufacturing. So I bring the product side of things to the startup world, to companies that are on their path to commercialization. And next slide, please. And that brings me to the reason why I joined a company called Neobionica, based out of Melbourne, Australia, actually. So I'm still based in Valencia, California, but the company is in Melbourne. And the idea for Neobionica is really to bridge the gap between proof of concept all the way to first-in-human and commercialization. So, Australia is pretty popular for academia and for clinical trials, but what was missing was really that step between to commercialize product, to bring it into market. And obviously, the US is a big market, so we're here with supporting startups, we're supporting strategics. Expertise is really neurotechnology. We're focused on neurotech. We bring, biomedical engineers, systems engineers, electrical engineers. We got state-of-the-art facilities in Melbourne itself with clean rooms and everything you need to build an active implantable medical device. And the beauty of it is we actually ride in a hospital. So we bring the clinician, the scientists, and the engineer together to, bring the next innovation in the neurotech market. And that's me in a nutshell. Thank you.
Just realized that actually all three panelists are from Valencia, and one of them actually has the Valencia in the title of the company. So it's quite unusual. Going back to, talking about generally about the body. So let me go to the next slide. So as we talked in other sessions, there is a lot of devices that talk about, that deal with brain and spinal cord. Electronic medicine is something that mostly addresses autonomic nervous system for various things. We have a lot of internal organs. In fact, this year, medicine added 80th internal organ. It's mesentery. So now we have 80 of them. And they're all being addressed by mostly autonomic nervous system. And there's a lot of diseases we can treat. The Neurotech Reports has been following this market for at least 6 years. We've been publishing reports on the market sizes we, of course, have to estimate in the future because this is very new, still growing. So this is, we're seeing on the left is what we estimate in 3 years and 10 years. So as you can see, overactive bladder remains the largest segment, and it's still growing fast. Of course, there is many other diseases. We'll talk about some of them later today. But I wanted to start today's discussion with overactive bladder because it's so important, and also because I think Jim brought up something very interesting in his presentation, and also we covered it in our recent issue of Bioelectric Reports, is the topic of market access, but not from patients' point of view, but tapping the right clinicians and expanding market through the right clinicians. So first, a little bit of a background on overactive bladder. So two main therapies are implantable sacral nerve and implantable tibial nerve. Of course, we have also percutaneous and transcutaneous tibial nerve, but those are a very small portion of the market. On implantable tibial nerve, of course, we have Valencia that was first approved in 22 PMA. In 2023, there was approval for Blue Wind Revi, and then Medtronic's Altaviva this year, PMA. So we have three implantable TVS. On top of it, we have three companies that have implantable SNS system. We have Medtronic's, interesting. We have Nuspera, sorry, and we have most recently, no, Nuspera is the most recent, but we also have Axonics, which is now part of Post. So three there, and even on top of that, we have few things coming in the future. We have Coloplast device coming soon. We have SNS device coming from Euromedical and Calm Medical, just announced yesterday. Pudental from Ember Therapeutics, Pelvic from Juniper, dorsal genital nerve stimulation from Innocon. So big number of players. So you might think that OEB market is saturated, but in fact, from what Jim just said, and also he mentioned to me recently that In fact, the penetration for implantable SNS is 0.2% of the market, right? So this is amazing. Like, we have so many players and penetration is close to zero. So why is that? And Jim already kind of mentioned this a little bit. So the thing is that we want to unclog the practice, as he mentioned. And the idea is that on top of implantation, you have to do a lot of post-implant, how do you call it? Post-implant service. So SNS requires quite a bit of that. Tibial nerve stimulation is typically, it's a low duty cycle stimulation with specific parameters, doesn't require much tuning. As Jim mentioned, actually I like his quote, he says, we implanted, forget it, and we see in 3 years, for the new implant, we unclog the practice, right? So Jim, please, you can turn on your microphone. Please tell us more how you aim to address 99%.
Yeah, so as I said earlier, most of these UUI patients don't exist in the overactive bladder physicians. So there's around 2,000, what I would call sacral nerve modulation surgeons. About 10% do about 80% of the volume, okay? So that's not a lot of doctors. And so what you have and what was created when InterStim came out, it's just ironic, about a year or two later, this OAB care pathway came about to direct these patients to the sacral nerve stimulation doctors that were trained. And that has not changed in 30 years. And so within these practices, you have OAB sacral nerve stimulation specialists, and urology is a specialist type of specialty. And so, but when you're treating, for example, you're treating prostate, whether it's cancer or BPH, 35–40% of those patients end up with UUI after the procedure, okay? So, and you have a lot of patients that stay within their family practitioners and or with their gynecological doctors, whether OB-GYN or GYN. And they try to get into these specialist practice, but the wait list is so long. Now, another example of this is if you go in for this care pathway, and like I said, I upset markets, I turn things upside down. This is just who I am and what I've done. And I've gone to the KOLs of this OAB, who are panelists, who have big reputations, and I told them your OAB care pathway is broken. It's never actually worked, but that's all you had. But the advent of new technology disrupts that. And what I mean by that, if I'm a patient that comes in on medication, 99% of the patients get to an OAB practice, they're on medication, 5 years later, they're still on medication. They've been offered PTNS, Botox, and sacral nerve, and they say no. So they're still on. So what did we do for that patient for 5 years? Nothing, right? And what have we done with your practice? We've clogged it up, right? Because we've decided this care pathway was the only way to do things. I suggest that you use a tibial stimulation device after medication fails. Why not? It's a 20-minute procedure done under local. You walk out and you go home, and we'll see you 3+ years from now for a new product. We go to talk to these men's health, the endourologist, present this to them, and the first thing they'll say is, I don't want anything to do with sacral nerve stimulation, not because of the companies, but it's the aftercare service. That clogs up a practice. You go put on scrubs, walk into a urologist or pain management office, just put on scrubs. You will have patients come up to you with the remote, with their charger, with everything. Can you help me, please? Right? You just put scrubs on and you'll see that happen. Think about the impact that has on the family. We talk about it as a urological community. Your patients are your community, your wait list is your community, your practices, and the family members that have to care for these patients. So we go in and we tell this story of let's unclog that practice. Let's set these patients free. Just set them free, right? And unclog your patients, see more patients, do new procedures, and let everybody go on with their life. That's how we're unclogging it, and that's where we're getting our success from.
All right. Well, I really hope this will be successful. As you call it, it's democratizing access, basically, right? Right. Okay. Next question is to Timothy, and this is regarding SetPoint being a beacon of being pioneer in the field of bioelectronic medicine, and a lot of companies are using SetPoint as an example including my previous company, Galvani. In addition to other implantable companies, now there is wearable auricular companies that are looking to use a beacon and also trying to replicate your successful therapy using auricular stimulation. There is one co-founded by Kevin Tracy called TAVNS AB in Sweden. And so my question is, how do you view these auricular therapies for rheumatoid arthritis? Do you see them as a competitor or potentially also increasing awareness of this therapy and basically benefiting both implantable and wearable therapies? How do you see them?
Yeah, so I go back to what you need to demonstrate for RA patients. I go back to those three things. You got to show reductions in disease activity. You got to show suppression of pro-inflammatory cytokines, and you got to show evidence, objective evidence of joint protection. If you can't do all three, it's not a viable standalone therapy. So when the company was first founded, believe it or not, our first approaches were drug therapies to try to exploit this inflammatory reflex. But systemic toxicity just proved to be a bit too much. And the next thing we tried, which is the natural thing, is to try non-invasive approaches, including auricular. And ultimately, what we discovered is that you have to fire action potentials in the vagus nerve. There's no way of getting around it. And you got to do it reliably. And at least in our hands, the way to do that was with an active implantable directly on the left cervical vagus nerve. Now, that noted, if some of these approaches can provide symptomatic relief, in addition to other therapies like drugs or what we are doing, I'm obviously very supportive. Anything that can help patients is a good thing. So it all depends on what you're targeting with these approaches. If you're really targeting a standalone therapy, the bar is extremely high.
Right. Question to Uli. We've already spoken about OAB, about autoimmune markets. You were working with multiple clients, and you have experience with cochlear, which is high bandwidth sensing and actuation technology. So with that background, where do you see in bioelectronic medicine the usefulness of closing the loop, sensing, which therapies you might be interested in? Is it like, for example, sleep apnea or other diseases where closing the loop really helps treating the disease? What do you think about potential use of these closed loop technologies?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, we work with a lot of clients in the PNS space, and you've mentioned a few, OSA, and pelvic health and these kind of therapies. I think, first of all, the biggest challenge is probably miniaturization for these devices compared to cochlear implants and SES and these type of therapies. So miniaturization and, like you said, closed loop sensing, it's coming. I see it in the well, I cannot disclose too much, but I see it in the OSA space and obviously in pelvic health as well. There's a few companies you mentioned, Juniper, for example, with novel approaches and which nerve they're like targeting and where they're going with that. So we as Neobionica as a service provider, we help them really, coming out of the research field, help them think about what would this be as a product. Like Jim said, think about the clinician. What's the unmet need? Where does it go? What does it mean? What's the usability? These kind of approaches we're trying to bring in the conversation early on so they can be successful, like translating their technologies into product. It's really good.
Thank you so much. Speaking about the clever designs, I wanted to talk to both Jim and Murthy about both of you have really amazing designs for these devices, and I have a lot of respect for Dave Peterson here, who developed eCoin, and also Mike Faltis, who developed the original microregulator. It's a unibody design that avoids using leads, avoids issues with MRI, and also has some clever features in both of these devices for explantation, which is quite critical. How do you think, how important is this for both clinicians and patients having these features for explantation and MRI compatibility?
Very important. It all depends on your indication, as I said before. For patients with no options, the level of tolerance will be quite high to things like revision surgeries at some frequency, or the burden on the patient to maintain and charge the device with external devices. But like I said earlier, our vision is why immunosuppress a single patient if you don't have to. The maximal benefit of a therapy like ours is early in the treatment paradigm. And if there is absolutely a need to immunosuppress them, you can add that in conjunction with our device. So it's really important, and what enabled us to do it is that we're leveraging a physiologic pathway forged over the millennia by evolution. And these mechanisms cannot be high energy mechanisms, or we'd all be hunchbacks with battery packs. We don't. So these are exquisitely sensitive reflexes. And we only need to stimulate it for a minute a day. And that enabled us to really miniaturize the device and rethink the entire paradigm from going from a Canon lead device. And remember, 80% of the patients are female, and they skew younger. So now you're going to tell the patient, I can treat your RA with a device, I'm going to make a chest pocket. There can be occasional chest pocket infections. There's going to be a scar in the chest, another one in the neck, and then you've got to come back every few years for revision surgery. You can see how that won't fly. So that's important, not just from the patient perspective, but from the perspective of the rheumatologist, who are not used to medical devices. They're used to sending patients to orthopedic surgeons when patients have joint issues. They're not used to medical devices. So demystifying it, making it as simple as possible, I think is key to driving adoption to earlier in the patient's journey.
Jim?
Yeah, so when it comes to the form factor, did you say, is Dave Peterson here?
Yes.
Where is he?
Oh, he just probably stepped out.
Oh my gosh, I haven't seen him in 15 years.
Right here. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So, that's incredible. So it kind of threw me off. So, with our device and the way it was designed, and I've known Dave since what, 1990, no, 2003. I'm dating myself. So, since 2003. So they were working on this for a very long time, and it was the simplicity behind it. A lot of us have been touched, we were talking about, by Al Mann in the Valencia area and in neuromodulation, and Al created a Bion, which was a small little neurostimulator, and Dave and team started thinking about this device, and with Jeff Greiner, and it's incredibly important, the form fit, where this can go anywhere, there's multiple applications for it, to be able to fit in. And then what happens if you need to do a revision, it's encapsulated, right? And you just make a little slit in that encapsulation, you pull it out and you throw one right back in. And so what you ask about MRI compatibility, and because of that, that's why more docs will adopt it than others, because everything we do, to what you just said, is simple. We simply set it, forget it, and we'll see you in a number of years. It's a simple procedure where we have PAs doing this procedure now under the supervision of a surgeon. They can do this procedure. Everything we're doing is simple. No, you're not going home with a programmer, okay? You're not. We set it, we forget it, and we'll see you. If you need to, they'll come in. Like I said, 91% of our patients get 2 programmings or less. That's incredible. That's flipping neuromodulation upside down. Right, where we don't need that aftercare. If you do it right, you don't need to make it complex. Make it as simple as you possibly can. That's the attractiveness to the masses. Okay, so now the MRI compatible, ours is not. So there's a trade-off. If you want MRI compatibility, I need to create a special battery. Right, I have to do things to get there. We've had our explant. We have had 1 product failure. Our infection to explant is 0.2% because of the simplicity of what we do. And our MRIs in the low single digits for explants, half of them didn't need to be explanted. They were getting their pelvic, they were getting their shoulder done, they were getting their knee. We only needed to be about 7 inches from the implant, but the patient wanted it out, so they took it out. right? But it's very, very low probability that's going to happen. So, but if we did, you're going to raise the cost of the device. You're going to do a lot of different things with us. It kind of washes itself out.
Thank you so much.
I didn't answer your question on MRI. It's absolutely critical for our indication. There's no escaping it. You have to be MRI conditional. RA patients get MRIs from time to time because of joint issues. And we're starting a trial in MS. And patients get MRIs, once a year when they have MS. So that had to be built in from the get-go.
Disease specific, of course. We have about 5 minutes. Questions from the audience. Any bioelectronic medicine questions? Okay. Oh, yes.
Thanks. My question is about minimally invasive vagus nerve stimulation. We talked about auricular stimulation. It was a very good question on that. I'd like to take it a step further. So targeting the vagus nerve in the neck, electrocore has a high frequency transcutaneous stimulation that requires no implant. I wonder if you could compare and contrast if a dose only requires 1 minute a day, what you see as the future for reducing the invasiveness of a therapy long-term?
Well, this is an outpatient procedure, and it takes an hour. And there's no lead wire. So from a patient perspective, when you say it's invasive, you got to talk about it in the context of what they're going through today. Patients have extremely invasive therapies and biologics. They go to infusion centers to get the drug infused, or they self-inject their drugs. And the impact of these drugs on the patient's quality of life is pretty significant. For me, the main thing is clinical evidence. So this is a field where the biggest drugs in the history of medicine reside. Humira at its peak was a $22 billion a year drug. You're not going to get away with anything less than absolutely stellar data and level 1 evidence. So that's the primary focus. And then you can ask, is there a way to do it non-invasively? At least the mechanism as we understand it has 2 components to it. One is to reduce inflammation through the inflammatory reflex. And at least in our hands, you have to have action potentials in the large fibers of the vagus nerve. We don't know how else you program immune cells to become quiescent. So if you just do the math, the amount of energy you have to put non-invasively through the neck to get to the vagus nerve that's 3 to 5 centimeters deep, you have to char the neck, which I don't think is a good approach. So there's some practical physical limitations to the approach. So I think it all depends. I think non-invasive approaches are great for superficial nerves. It makes all the sense in the world because you can couple to the nerve and get things done. Outside of that, I think it's a bit challenging.
Yeah, one more thing. I believe SetPoint is in a Category 3 environment. We're in a Category 3 environment. We talked about reimbursement yesterday. So you've got to be very well, if you're going after that marketplace in a Category 3, you've got to be very well prepared to be able to attack that and have a very reproducible process for your commercial team to be able to follow that, to be successful. So that's very key. I bring that up also because how many here are familiar with the WISER program that's being implemented by CMS? Show of hands. Okay. If you're not familiar with it and you're in the spinal cord stimulation business, if you're in the sacral nerve stimulation business, you need to look it up because Medicare is now going to be watching and trying to get pre-approvals in 6 or 7 states for those procedures to be done. Why? It's called, the first word in the WISER is wasteful, okay? The number of trial to perm ratios is being scrutinized. And so when you're developing a device, you need to keep that in mind because utilization will go down. It's called the Hawthorne effect. You start getting, people are paying attention, you start doing the right things, okay? I bring that up because you need to, as you're bringing products to market, to know that And that just because it's a category 3 doesn't mean you can't win. All right, you can win in that marketplace, but you need to be aware of all these things that are going on in the reimbursement with CMS, with insurers to be successful, bring out product to market. I just want to make that point.
It's very insightful. I would like to thank the panel. Thank you so much. Jim is not here, but I think we are due for next panel.
I can't.
Yes. All right.